Okay, so we're having a little bit of terminology issues here. So I put this all together so you could see how all of these interrelate and so you can have a better feel for how to use the terms. So what we have are all of the types of costs that we've talked about in Chapter 14. And those involve the direct material, labor, factory overhead, which is comprised of indirect labor, indirect material, and indirect expenses. So these make up the cost of the goods manufactured. The prime and the conversion, or both, involve direct labor and materials for prime, and direct labor and factory overhead for conversion. Now, sometimes, obviously, labor is going to be used twice, right? So, kind of keep that in mind. These costs are going to be, you're going to have a selection here, here, and here. I mean, they're all the same animal with just different stripes on it, different times, different names. Product and period costs are Product costs are going to be your cost of goods manufactured and your cost of goods sold expenses, costs. And period costs are selling and administrative costs. So across the top is the terminology, what we call them. This is what comprises each of these. Now, these are just examples. This could be manager salaries, supervisor salaries, lead people salaries, any type of um, support uh, worker who is helping the assembly worker put the part together, who's supporting them. It could be maintenance, it could be janitorial. Anything that's in an indirect way is associated with that production would be an indirect labor. Same thing with indirect materials. That could be screws, that could be sprinkles, that could be something that's kind of very low in volume. And it's really hard to say I used exactly 25 sprinkles on that cupcake or whatever. That would be an indirect. Or if the sprinkles are a really big part of the cupcake, they could be considered a direct material. So it is kind of a little bit of a judgment call when you look at it. If you have an indirect expense, that is an expense that's directly related to the factory or the assembly line. That isn't a indirect material, indirect labor, or direct labor or direct material. And that would be things like utilities, insurance, depreciation, as long as it's factory, as long as it's involved with the factory. And these three right here, the indirect labor, material, and expense, make up the factory overhead. So if it ends up in one of these categories, it's going to end up in factory overhead. The prime and conversion are just used for um, uh, statistics and measurements that you use outside of the reports. And the product and period cost just kind of tell you where that cost falls within an income statement. Product cost is always going to be associated with the cost of goods manufactured or the cost of goods sold, and selling and administrative cost. And you could have other, i.e., something to do with equity. You could have to do something with equity, and it doesn't follow with a period cost or a product cost. It's an other cost. So now, what are we going to do with this? Well, let me show you how to do this. This is a what is. Okay, plant manager salary for the plant. Well, what is that? It's not a direct material or labor. It's a indirect labor here, right? So that means it's a factory overhead that goes there. Now, if it's factory overhead, it's conversion, correct? And if it's in the manufacturing segment of the cost of goods manufactured, then it's a product cost. Can you see how this works? So I'm going to make sure all these get centered for you because that's real important. There. So you're going to go down and do each one of these. Maintenance supplies. What do you think that might be? Well, it's dealing with the factory, so we know it's going to be in here. It doesn't really deal with a product, so it's probably an indirect, right? Which means it goes into factory overhead. Now, is it a prime or conversion? Well, it's factory overhead, so it's going to be a conversion. It deals with cost of goods manufactured, so it's going to be a product cost. Kind of get the idea? Okay, now you do it and we'll go over it for Friday. Alrighty, thank you.